May 30th, 2005. That date, it's just sort of stuck in everyone's mind, right? It marks this really abrupt, terrifying end to what should have been a high school graduation trip.
Absolutely. We're talking about Natalee Holloway, of course, an 18-year-old honors grad from Alabama who just vanished. In Aruba, this picture-perfect Caribbean spot.
Yeah, a place you think of as paradise. And her disappearance, it didn't just stay a local story, it exploded into this massive ongoing international media event.
It really did. And think about who she was. Poised for University of Alabama, full scholarship, pre-med track, bright future. And then just hours before her flight home from Oranjestad, she's gone.
And that kicked off, nearly 2 decades of searching and confusion, conflicting stories, legal battles, so much international friction, too.
And at the center of it all, really, was the prime suspect, Joran van der Sloot. His constantly shifting stories, his denials, his manipulation of the truth basically defined the entire case for years.
So that's our mission today in this deep dive. We're trying to synthesize an incredibly chaotic timeline. We want to dig into the facts or what we know of them, sift through the false leads, the legal twists, the, frankly, overwhelming media coverage.
It's crucial because while Natalee was declared legally dead back in January 2012, the whole story, the whole arc, is really shaped by van der Sloot's journey from denial to eventually that horrifying confession.
Exactly. It's the narrative shifts that make this so complex. All those denials, the partial admissions, the things that were just outright lies.
Right, before finally getting to a definitive confession. And even that came, almost 20 years later? As part of a plea deal in the U.S. for a different crime, that constant game playing, that manipulation, it just frustrated everyone, investigators, the family, the public, watching all this unfold.
So we really need to unpack those statements, understand how they impacted the initial search and everything that followed.
Okay, let's go back to those final known moments. Early morning, Monday, May 30th, 2005.
Natalee's classmates last saw her around 1:30 a.m. She was leaving Carlosane. Charlie's a really popular nightclub there in Oranjestad.
And she wasn't alone. She got into a car with 3 local guys. There was Deepak Kalpo. He was 21, driving. It was his car. His younger brother, Satish Kalpo, 18.
And the third person?
Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old Dutch honors student living on the island. He quickly became the focus, the prime suspect.
And critically, Natalee had that flight scheduled for later the same day. But she never made it. She never even checked out of her hotel, the Holiday Inn.
Right, her packed bags, her passport, all still in her room, waiting.
Now, we have to talk about the context of the trip itself, because that immediately complicated things, didn't it? This wasn't just a quiet getaway.
No, definitely not. You had 125 high school graduates and only 7 chaperones overseeing them.
Wow, that ratio seems low.
It does. And reports surface almost immediately about wild partying and specifically excessive drinking among the students.
And that became a factor in the early investigation.
A huge factor. It influenced the initial theories. The first lead investigator, Police Commissioner Gerald Dompig, he actually stated publicly that the students from Mountain Brook were involved in significant drinking.
He actually said Holloway drank all day, every day. That's a strong statement.
He did. He cited claims she started mornings with cocktails, missed breakfast because of it. And look, some of her own classmates later confirmed the drinking on the trip was, quote, kind of excessive.
So the Aruban police, based on this, they immediately considered a non-foul play scenario.
Exactly. That detail fueled an early theory. Maybe she died from alcohol poisoning or perhaps drugs were involved, and it wasn't necessarily a violent act. That possibility shifted some of the initial focus, maybe away from immediate suspicion of abduction or murder.
Okay, so what about the actual investigation starting? Natalee's family didn't just sit back and wait, did they?
Not at all. Her mother, Beth Twitty, and her stepfather, Jug Twitty, they were on a plane almost immediately, reportedly a private jet. They flew straight to Aruba.
And they hit the ground running.
Absolutely. Within just 4 hours of landing, they gave the Aruban police Joran van der Sloot's name and address.
4 hours? How did they get that so fast?
Beth Twitty said it came from the night manager at the Holiday Inn. He apparently recognized van der Sloot on a security tape and knew who he was. So the family, with police officers, drove almost straight to the van der Sloot house to search.
That immediate, intense involvement from the family must have put incredible pressure on the local police right from the start.
Immense pressure. And this is where the story starts to get really tangled. Van der Sloot's first version of events.
Yeah, what was that initial account?
Well, his first story, which Deepak Kalpo apparently backed up initially, it had some strange details. He claimed they drove Natalee way out to the California lighthouse area. It's kind of a remote spot.
Why there?
He said she wanted to see sharks. That was the reason given. Then he claimed they just dropped her back at her hotel around 2 a.m. And he added this detail, that she supposedly fell getting out of the car, refused his help, and then as they drove off, they saw some unidentified dark man in a black shirt walking towards her.
Right, the mysterious other man. That sounds convenient, like an attempt to deflect blame immediately.
It definitely raised eyebrows for investigators. It felt like a classic attempt to muddy the waters.
But despite how flimsy that story sounds now,
Yeah.
it triggered a massive search effort, didn't it?
Oh, massive is putting it lightly. For an island like Aruba, the resources they poured in were incredible. Hundreds of volunteers, locals, and people flying in from the U.S.
Didn't the government even give civil servants time off?
They did. Thousands of government workers got the day off just to help with the physical search. You had Dutch Marines searching the coastline, FBI agents flown in, aircraft doing aerial searches, divers in the water.
Yeah.
Even local banks chipped in, raising like $20,000 just to support the volunteer teams. It was a huge coordinated effort covering the island and the sea. Cost millions, but the result?
Nothing. No body.
Exactly. Nothing concrete was found.
And this early phase, legally speaking, it got known for this sort of catch-and-release cycle, right, which must have just fueled the family's frustration and the media attention.
Yeah, it looked really chaotic from the outside. It started even before Vandersloot was formally arrested. On June 5th, just days after she vanished, police arrested 2 former security guards from the Allegro Hotel, Nick John and Abraham Jones.
On what grounds?
Suspicion of murder and kidnapping. The details were murky, but some early reports hinted it might have been based on misleading information from Vandersloot or the Kalpos, but they were let go after about 8 days. No real evidence.
So then the focus snapped back to the 3 guys in the car.
Right. Vandersloot and the Kalpo brothers were arrested June 9th. Now, Aruban law is a bit different. You can be detained based on just serious suspicion, even without finding a body. Commissioner Dompick later said they were the main focus from the very beginning, that they'd been under surveillance, phones tapped, everything. But he also suggested that the intense pressure, particularly from the family and media, might have forced the police to arrest them maybe a bit prematurely, before they had a rock-solid case.
And as soon as they were detained, that first story they told, it just fell apart.
Completely dissolved into chaos.
Yeah.
First, they seemed to agree on a new story, that they dropped Vandersloot and Holloway off alone near the Marriott Hotel Beach. Vandersloot then claimed he just left her sitting there.
Okay, number 2.
But then Vandersloot offered a third version. Now, he tried to blame the Kalpo brothers. He claimed he was dropped off at home and Natalee was driven away by them.
Trying to throw them under the bus.
Exactly. Commissioner Dompick pretty much dismissed that third story right away. He said Vandersloot only claimed that because he saw the Kalpos were pointing fingers at him, so he wanted to, quote, screw them also.
So the police kind of believed the second version more, the one about being dropped off near the Marriott.
They seemed to lean towards that one, yeah. But even then, there was no physical proof, just conflicting statements.
So even with all these changing stories clearly showing someone was lying, the lack of a body, the lack of forensics, it meant they couldn't hold them indefinitely.
That was the core legal problem. The Kalpo brothers were released on July 4th. Vandersloot was held longer, about 60 days total, but ultimately he had to be released too.
And weren't there other arrests around that time? A DJ Vandersloot's father.
Yes, exactly. A DJ named Steve Gregory Crows was arrested briefly, and even Uran's father, Paulus Vandersloot, was arrested on June 22nd. Both were released pretty quickly. It just reinforced that pattern. Arrest based on suspicion, released due to lack of hard evidence for charges.
So the search didn't stop with just police and volunteers on the ground. They brought in some serious tech, right? Which really shows how high the stakes were, especially for the Netherlands and the U.S.
Oh, definitely. They deployed some advanced stuff. Dutch F-16 fighter jets flew missions over the island.
Fighter jets? What were they looking for?
They were equipped with special infrared sensors, trying to detect any unusual heat signatures, maybe underground disturbances, anything that might suggest, a hidden grave.
Wow. Does that work?
No. And later, they also did detailed comparisons of high-resolution satellite photos. They looked at pictures taken around the time Natalee disappeared and compared them to newer ones.
Looking for what? Changes in the ground.
Exactly. Any unexpected shifts in the soil, disturbed earth, anything suggesting a possible burial site. Again, hugely intensive, very expensive, and completely fruitless. Nothing came of it.
And the whole investigation just seemed constantly bogged down by these promising leads that just evaporated.
Yes, it became almost a defining feature of the case. Remember that potential blood sample found in Deepak Kalpo's car?
Yeah, that was huge news for a while.
Huge news. But when they tested it properly, it turned out not to be blood at all, or at least not human blood. Then you had these eyewitness accounts that seemed significant at first.
Like the gardener.
Right, the local gardener who said he saw Vandersloot driving into the Aruba Racket Club area trying to hide his face, somewhere between 2:30 and 3 a.m. that morning. Circumstantial, but intriguing.
And what about the jogger? The person who claimed they saw men burying a body?
That was a really high-profile tip. This jogger claimed to have seen men burying a blonde woman in the island's landfill.
So they searched the landfill again.
Extensively. Police had done initial sweeps, but based on this detailed statement, they went back 3 more times. The FBI even flew in specialized cadaver dogs. They dug, used heavy equipment. Nothing. It was another dead end.
And the duct tape.
With the hair.
Ah, yes, the duct tape. Found with some blonde hair stuck to it. That piece of evidence was tested twice. First in the Netherlands, then again at the FBI's main lab in Quantico, Virginia.
No.
Conclusively not Natalee Holloway's hair. So, you see this pattern. A promising lead, huge resources poured into testing or searching, and then disappointment. It just ate up time and resources and deepened the frustration. And the fact that they kept rearresting the main suspects, that really shows the immense pressure the Aruban police were under, doesn't it? From the family, internationally.
It screams desperation, really. The Kalpo brothers were arrested again in August 2005. At the same time, they also arrested a new guy, Freddie Arambatzis. He was kind of linked to a separate issue, something about inappropriate photos involving Vandersloot and the Kalpos with an underage girl, but
the Kalpo rearrest, was that related?
Commissioner Dompig basically admitted later that rearresting the Kalpos then was, quote, an unsuccessful attempt to pressure the brothers into confessing. They were hoping another stint in detention would make them break.
Didn't work, obviously. And Vandersloot's father, Paulus, being arrested. That must have added a whole other layer of legal drama.
It absolutely did. Paulus Vandersloot was held briefly back in June 2005. He actually sued the Aruban government later and initially won an unjust detention action.
Meaning a court agreed he shouldn't have been arrested.
Essentially, yes, that the grounds were insufficient. But that ruling was appealed and the damages award was eventually overturned. Still, the whole legal fight with the father shows how far the Aruban authorities were pushing things, likely due to that intense external pressure, and it led to these complicated, expensive legal battles.
Speaking of expense, you mentioned the cost earlier. That $3 million figure for Aruba?
Yeah. Investigator Dompig revealed that in a March 2006 interview, $3 million US. And to put that in context for a small island nation, that was around 40% of their entire police operational budget at the time.
40% on one case.
40%. It just underscores the enormous weight of this investigation, the obligation they felt, especially towards the U.S. and the Netherlands, to get answers.
And while all this legal back and forth and searching was happening, Jorn Vandersloot wasn't exactly staying quiet. He kept talking to the media, right? Reshaping his story again.
Oh, yeah. He gave that interview to Fox News in 2006, came up with yet another version.
What was it this time?
Now, he claimed Holloway wanted to have sex, but he supposedly refused her because he didn't have a condom.
Right.
He said he just left her sitting alone on the beach around 3:00 a.m. because he had to go home, get ready for school the next day. And he claimed Satish Kalpo picked him up.
Did Satish confirm that?
Satish's lawyer immediately denied it, flat out. And Vandersloot's justification for all his previous lies, he just said he thought she'd turn up later, that it wasn't a big deal at first. It felt very calculated, admit being with her, but deny any harm.
And around this time, wasn't there more talk from officials about the accidental death theory?
Yes, particularly from Commissioner Dompig as he was transitioning out of leading the investigation. He stated publicly his personal belief that Holloway probably wasn't murdered in a violent way, but more likely died from, say, alcohol or maybe drug poisoning.
And the crime then would be?
The crime would be hiding the body afterwards, panicking and disposing of her remains, maybe in the ocean, rather than a premeditated killing. It offered a plausible reason for why, despite the massive searches, no body, no clear evidence of violence was ever found.
But even with that theory floating around, the investigation wasn't totally dead. The Netherlands actually took over, right?
Yeah.
For one more big push.
That's right. Aruba formally requested the Netherlands take the lead. So in April and May of 2007, you saw renewed searches. They focused heavily on the Vandersloot family home and the Kalpo residence. Investigators were literally probing the ground with shovels and metal rods.
And during this time, Vandersloot actually published a book.
He did, in Dutch. Bezak Natalee Holloway, The Case of Natalee Holloway. In it, he stuck to his story of innocence, but he did offer an apology for his earlier lies.
But ultimately, even with the Dutch involved, the lack of hard evidence persisted.
Correct. Vandersloot and the Kalpos were actually briefly rearrested again in November 2007, this time on suspicion of manslaughter and causing serious bodily harm resulting in death, which implies, a non-intentional killing, maybe negligence or poisoning related.
But they were released again.
Yes, a judge ordered their release. And a later court appeal ruling specifically stated that the case file contained, quote, no direct indications that Natalee died because of a violent crime.
So officially closed.
By December 2007, yes. The prosecutor announced the case was officially closed due to insufficient evidence. That marked the end of that initial phase of the Aruban investigation.
But that closure, it barely lasted a month, did it?
Yeah.
Because then came this incredibly dramatic twist, the hidden camera confession tapes. This is where things get even more chaotic and, frankly, criminal.
Yeah, this was a bombshell dropped by the Dutch crime reporter Peter R. de Vries. He basically announced he'd solved the case.
And he had footage.
He aired footage in February 2008. It showed Joran Vandersloot, seemingly unguarded, smoking marijuana in a car with an acquaintance, and talking about what happened to Natalee.
What did he say on the tape? What was the story this time?
On the tape, Vandersloot claimed that while he and Natalee were together, she started, quote, convulsively shaking, and then just became unresponsive. He said he tried to revive her, couldn't, and then he called a friend.
And the friend.
The friend supposedly told him to just go home, and that the friend would take care of disposing of the body, which, according to Vandersloot on the tape, the friend did. This was huge. The Aruba prosecutor immediately tried to get an arrest warrant based on this.
Okay, wait. He's on tape, seemingly confessing to being involved in her death and the disposal of her body. Why would an arrest warrant be denied? That seems counterintuitive.
It's a really critical legal point that often gets overlooked. The judge denied the warrant and the appeals failed too. Why? Because the court found the statements Vandersloot made on that tape were highly inconsistent with the evidence they already had from years of investigation.
So the confession didn't match the known facts.
Essentially, yes. The timeline didn't quite fit, or other details contradicted what investigators believed they knew. Plus, the court considered the context. He was high on marijuana when he said it. So, in the eyes of the law there, a confession under the influence, one that clashes with existing evidence, wasn't enough grounds for detention.
And what did Vandersloot do?
He later met with investigators and just denied the tape was true, claimed he made it all up because he was high. He basically fell back on his old story. He left her on the beach.
Unbelievable. And wasn't there also controversy surrounding the guy who actually made the recording?
Yes, that added another layer of doubt. The man who secretly taped Vandersloot was Patrick van der Riem. He was a Dutch businessman, also an ex-convict. Turns out, van der Riem was also secretly taped later on.
What did he say?
He admitted he'd actually known Vandersloot for years, which contradicted his earlier claims of just recently meeting him. And worse, he bragged about expecting to become a millionaire from the book deal he got related to the hidden camera footage.
So that raised questions about his motives, the timing.
Exactly. It cast a shadow over the whole thing. Was Vandersloot genuinely confessing, or was something else going on?
And Vandersloot just kept generating headlines, didn't he?
Right.
What about those bizarre claims about sexual slavery?
Oh, right. That was later in 2008, November. He went on Fox News making these wild allegations, said he'd actually sold Natalee into sexual slavery.
Sold her?
Yeah, and claimed his father had paid off 2 police officers who supposedly knew she'd been taken to Venezuela.
Did anyone believe that?
He retracted the statements almost immediately. And investigators looked into a recording he provided, supposedly of his father confirming the payoff. A Dutch newspaper analysis concluded it was almost certainly Vandersloot himself on the recording, just speaking in a lower voice.
Just more deception. Seems like a pattern of trying to stay in the spotlight, maybe even monetize the notoriety.
It really felt like that, constant fabrication. But then we get to 2010, and a shift from just lies to outright prosecutable crime, the extortion attempt. This is the act that, ironically, finally unlocked the truth years later.
Okay, tell us about the extortion.
In March 2010, Vandersloot reached out to Beth Twitty's lawyer, John Q. Kelly. He offered a deal. He'd reveal the location of Natalee's body and the circumstances of her death for money.
How much?
$250,000, $250,000. But he wanted $25,000 up front.
So the family contacted the authorities.
They did, and the FBI saw this immediately for what it was: federal crimes, extortion, and wire fraud. So they set up a sting operation.
Did Vandersloot take the bait?
He did. Undercover investigators in Aruba filmed him receiving $10,000 in cash, and then another $15,000 was sent via wire transfer.
So the FBI had him.
They had the federal charges locked down.
Yeah.
Because the crucial part was the information he provided in exchange for that money, it was demonstrably false. He gave a location, claimed her body was buried under the foundation of a specific house. That house hadn't even been built back in 2005 when Natalee disappeared. So the information was bogus, proving the intent to defraud. That sealed the wire fraud charge.
Okay, so he commits this federal crime, takes the money, and then something truly chilling happens just weeks later. The timing is just unbelievable.
It's staggering. 5 years to the day after Natalee Holloway vanished, May 30th, 2010, another young woman is found dead. Stephanie Flores Ramirez.
In Peru, right?
Yes, in Lima, Peru. She was 21, a business student, found dead in a hotel room, and the room was registered in Joran Vandersloot's name.
He'd fled there after the extortion payment.
It appears so. He took the money and went to Peru. The parallels, the brutality, it was terrifyingly similar to what many feared had happened to Natalee.
And did he confess to killing Stephanie Flores?
He did. Peruvian police reported that Vandersloot confessed he killed her in a fit of rage.
Why? What was the trigger?
According to the confession, she had used his laptop without his permission and found information on it connecting him to the Natalee Holloway case. That discovery apparently set him off.
Wow. So the Holloway case was directly linked to this second murder.
Directly. He was arrested, eventually pleaded guilty to Stephanie's murder in January 2012, and was sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison.
And it was right around that same time, January 2012, that Natalee Holloway was officially declared legally dead back in the U.S.
Yes, the timing coincided. Her father, Dave Holloway, had filed the petition back in 2011. Beth Twitty initially opposed it, wanting to hold on to hope, perhaps. But after 6 years, the legal process moved forward. A judge finalized it in January 2012. Legally, Natalee was no longer a missing person, but deceased.
So Vandersloot is now in prison in Peru for murder. But the search for Natalee's remains, that didn't just stop, did it? People still wanted closure.
No, the search continued, driven largely by Dave Holloway's persistence and occasional new tips, though they always seemed to lead to more dead ends.
Like the jawbone.
Right. In November 2010, a jawbone was found near a swamp in Aruba. There was a brief flurry of hope, tests were rushed, but it wasn't Natalee's.
And then there was that Oxygen documentary in 2017.
Yeah, that series followed a new informant who led investigators to a spot where they found what looked like human skeletal remains.
Was it her?
DNA testing confirmed one piece was definitely human bone, but it wasn't a match for Natalee Holloway. Another painful false hope.
And didn't the informant involved in that documentary have his own disturbing story? And a disturbing end?
Yes, that was John Ludwig. He claimed on the show that he had actually helped Vandersloot back in 2010. He said they dug up Natalee's remains from an initial burial spot, then smashed them, mixed them with dog bones, and had them cremated to destroy the evidence completely.
That's horrifying. And what happened to Ludwig?
He was killed himself in March 2018, reportedly during an attempted kidnapping in Florida. It just added another dark, violent chapter to the periphery of this already tragic case.
It's just incredible. So the final actual truth about how Natalee died, it didn't come from any of these searches or Aruban investigations. It came directly from that U.S. extortion charge from 2010.
That's the ultimate tragic irony, isn't it? The key that unlocked the truth was that federal case. In June 2023, after lengthy negotiations, Joran Vandersloot was temporarily extradited from Peru to the United States.
Just to face those old extortion and wire fraud charges.
Exactly. The U.S. authorities finally had leverage over him related to Beth Holloway.
And that leverage produced the confession.
It did. On October 18, 2023, Vandersloot pleaded guilty to the extortion and wire fraud. And as a condition of that plea agreement, he had to provide a full account of what happened to Natalee Holloway. This was done formally in what's called a proffer letter.
A proffer letter. What's that exactly?
It's basically a formal statement, an offer of information or confession given to prosecutors, often in exchange for some consideration or leniency in a related legal matter. In this case, it was part of his deal for pleading guilty to the extortion.
And what did he say in the proffer? What was the final truth?
He confessed everything. He admitted he killed Natalee Holloway on that beach back in 2005. He said he hit her with a cinder block blunt force trauma after she rejected his sexual advances.
A cinder block. Just brutal. And what about her body?
He confessed that after killing her, he took her body out into the ocean and disposed of it there. That's why no remains were ever found on land.
So 18 years later, the truth finally came out, tied directly to that plea deal.
18 years of lies and speculation ended by a confession given to resolve a different crime. He was then returned to Peru to continue serving his sentence for murdering Stephanie Flores Ramirez. The U.S. extradition was always meant to be temporary, get the charges resolved, get the truth about Natalee.
It provided answers for the family, at least.
No.
A horrific truth, but maybe some form of closure, even without being able to bring her home.
A measure of justice, perhaps. Knowing what happened, even if the physical recovery is impossible.
Now, we really need to spend some time on the other major aspect of this case. The intense criticism, both of the investigation itself and the absolute media frenzy surrounding it. This had real-world consequences, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The relationship between the Holloway family, particularly Beth Twitty, and the Aruban authorities was fraught with tension, very public tension.
She was very critical of their progress.
Repeatedly, and sometimes quite harshly. For example, after the Calpo brothers were released early on, she publicly called them criminals.
How did that go down in Aruba?
Not well. It actually sparked protests. About 200 Arubans demonstrated outside the courthouse with signs saying things like, "Respect our Dutch laws or go home." It highlighted a real culture clash and defensiveness. Beth Twitty did eventually apologize for those specific remarks, saying they came from despair and frustration.
And there were even these strange claims flying around, disputed by the family, that maybe U.S. officials were somehow hindering the Ugbi police.
Yeah, that was reported in an Aruban newspaper, Amigo. It cited unnamed local authorities claiming the FBI had actually obstructed their investigation.
Obstructed? How?
The details were vague, but the report also included this really bizarre claim that an unauthorized medjet, like a medical evacuation jet, landed in Aruba within a day of Natalee's disappearance. The implication being some kind of covert U.S. operation tried to get Holloway off the island without telling local officials.
Did the family address that?
The Twitties strongly denied those claims, but the fact they were even reported shows the level of mistrust and suspicion that built up between the different parties involved.
And the family didn't just criticize, they tried to apply real pressure, right?
Yeah.
Through that travel boycott idea.
Yes, that became a significant political issue. In September 2005, Beth Twitty started calling for tourists to boycott Aruba and other Dutch Caribbean islands, citing safety concerns.
Did that get any traction in the U.S.?
It did, especially in Alabama. The governor supported it. The state's congressional delegation urged people to join in. Senator Richard Shelby publicly said he didn't believe tourists could trust they'd be protected in Aruba.
How did Aruba react?
The Prime Minister of Aruba called the boycott effort preposterous and irresponsible. Ultimately, it didn't get widespread federal backing in the U.S. and didn't seem to drastically hurt Aruba's tourism long-term, but it definitely strained relations.
Okay, let's flip to the U.S. side. The media coverage here was just wall-to-wall for a long time. And that drew a lot of criticism itself, didn't it? This idea of missing white woman syndrome.
That criticism was immediate and persistent. And it's a really important point to discuss. U.S. news networks gave this case an unprecedented amount of airtime. Night after night, it was the lead story.
And the critique is that this focus is disproportionate.
Exactly. The argument is that cases involving missing white women, especially if they're young, attractive, and relatively affluent, tend to receive vastly more media attention than cases involving missing men, or particularly missing people of color.
So the sheer volume of coverage kind of skewed public perception and maybe even resource allocation.
That's the core of the critique. It validates the concern that many other missing persons cases, especially involving minorities, remain largely invisible to the national media. It raises questions about whose stories get told and why.
Interestingly, Natalee's own family also criticized the media, but from the opposite perspective later on, right?
Yeah.
After Hurricane Katrina.
Yes. They felt the coverage dropped off significantly after Hurricane Katrina hit the U.S. Gulf Coast in August 2005. They even called it the Katrina effect.
Their claim being that Aruba used that shift in focus.
They suggested that Aruban authorities took advantage of the fact that the U.S. media and the world's attention was suddenly focused entirely on the devastation of Katrina to release the suspects with, quote, little publicity. Dave Holloway specifically noted the timing, saying the suspects were sent home just as the world was consumed by the hurricane crisis. It shows how sensitive the whole situation was to external events and media cycles.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's just clear this case was defined by its incredible complexity. We're talking nearly 2 decades of Denials, lies, constantly changing stories, this huge public spectacle, intense international friction.
And the final awful truth about the murder itself, it only came out as essentially a side effect, a condition of a plea deal for a completely separate crime, that extortion attempt, years later.
It's just a devastating story. A mix of, you could say, investigative failures, certainly immense frustration, geopolitical tensions, and then finally this hard-won, very ugly truth.
And the impact, the implications of this case, they're still felt today, aren't they? It forced really uncomfortable conversations about media bias, about responsible crime reporting.
And practical changes too, right? Like the Travel Safety Foundation Beth Twitty started.
Yes, the International Safe Travels Foundation came directly out of this experience. But perhaps most significantly, the case really exposes sometimes the outright conflicts that can happen with international law enforcement cooperation, especially when a case explodes under such intense public and media pressure.
And that final confession, the details in that proffer letter, the cinder block, disposing of the body in the ocean. It finally provided the what happened even if the where remains lost to the sea. Some measure of closure, as you said.
A brutal closure, knowing the facts even without a grave to visit. So considering everything we've talked about, the intense, often contradictory media storm, the enormous public pressure on everyone involved, here's something for you, our listeners, to think about.
How might this whole thing have played out differently if it hadn't become such a massive public spectacle? If the investigation could have somehow unfolded quietly outside the glare of the cameras?
Would that lack of pressure have just stalled everything indefinitely? Or could the quiet maybe have allowed investigators to gather better evidence, untainted evidence, maybe reach the truth much sooner? It's impossible to know, right? But it's a challenging question, much like the years of mystery that finally ended with that confession.